अरे स्टार्ट नहीं Cool.
Hey guys, we're gonna start in the next 2 minutes. Please come and take your seats. Okay, we just had three speakers talking about what chain abstraction is and what it would look like for a developer and the user. This half of the event is for builders to showcase about their products, what they are doing with the chain abstraction, and how it might help you get started. First going out, we have Ethan from Particle Network, who's going to speak about Particle Network and also kind of brief us on what their definition of chain abstraction is. Ethan, please take it away.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Super glad to kind of do a quick talk here at Chainless. I wish I could be there in person. Unfortunately, I'm quite far away. I'm out in Denver, so it's around 8 a.m. over here, so quite different. But hope you guys have had a good event so far. And I think it's, I was going to say GM, but I think it's 6 or 7 p.m. over there. But anyways, yeah, I'm very glad that we had that opportunity to kind of go through a quick presentation here, because I wanted to go through a number of different things today. I think you guys might find quite interesting. Of course, within the talks that you've listened to so far, I think you probably kind of generally understand what chain abstraction is, but I want to kind of go through basically three different things. First, I want to go through why Web3 really needs chain abstraction. I'm going to go through this pretty fast because I think you guys probably get the general point after the other talks. Then what I really want to do is define chain abstraction, which I think is something that we've really been working hard at Particle for, which is like giving chain abstraction a specific definition and creating some understanding around what this term actually means and how it materializes. And then finally, I'm going to spend some time talking about our product at Particle, which is what we call universal accounts, which is actually can best be understood by the title of this presentation, which is one address, one balance across every chain. But for a quick introduction, my name is Ethan, although I go by the alias Tabasco online, and I do developer relations at Particle Network. I've been working in Web3 for about 3 years at this point. First started doing developer relations when I was 16, and I've been doing it full time since. So yeah, I joined Particle back in September. We've done a lot over the past kind of few years. We did a lot of account abstraction stuff, and we're one of the largest account abstraction providers in the ecosystem. Then this year, we're really focusing on chain abstraction and kind of evolved our tech stack towards this with what we call universal accounts, which I'll get a little bit further into later. But first, what I want to do is kind of build some context around, why we want to focus on chain abstraction and really what the underlying problem is, which hopefully I can kind of attack it from a slightly different angle than maybe what you guys heard throughout the other presentations today. So first of all, what I want to highlight is that by no means is UX and Web3 broken. I think what you might hear a lot is this kind of rhetoric that Web3's UX is terrible. I would generally disagree. I think that actually UX and Web3 can be really good. We have the tools for it. And you can create very Web2-like experiences natively within Web3 today, and where you abstract 99% of the Web3 experience away, where you have a user on board via a social account or any wallet that they're already using. They can leverage account abstraction. They can leverage session keys. They can have gaseous transactions, where you can basically have full on-chain activity without the user really understanding or knowing. So the UX in isolation, in the silo of a specific application, is actually really good, depending on what you're actually building. So you can build an application with bad UX, or you can build an application with great UX, because the tooling is available. And I really want to kind of highlight this, is that, in the silo of an application, good UX is actually quite easy today for end developers. The issue at large, which I'm sure you guys are aware of, is that the UX on the ecosystem level for the entirety of Web3 is really where all this breaks down, and where it's pretty terrible today. Because as a user, we can use this example of application A. So I onboard to application A, kind of go back with my Google account, my Twitter account, or my wallet, MetaMask, anything like that. And, I onboard this application. I have my balance A because it's on chain A. And then I start interacting with this application. All of a sudden, I realize that, I want to go interact with application B, but application B is actually on chain B. So, okay, I go over there, and well, now I have a balance that's balance B, because it's different than the balance I had on chain A. So as a user, okay, now I have this like empty balance on the second application, but it's the same account, but not the same balance. So then I go to, let's say, okay, I want to go use application C now. Same thing. I go to application C. It's a different balance. It's on chain C. So now I have, multiple balances that I have no idea how to get funds between. And then as a user, I discover, okay, I need to bridge funds from my balance on the first application I used to my balances on application B and C. So I go find a bridge. Sometimes there's not bridges available. If there is a bridge available, it can be slow, it can be expensive, it can be not very secure. And then once I finally bridge funds across chains and actually start leveraging application B or application C, now the challenge is that as a user, I actually have to be cognitively aware of the balances that I have on each chain, which means I have to track this in my mind. So, okay, I have $7 in application A, I have $5 in application B, and I have $2 in application C. So I have to keep these checks and balances mentally, which is a huge ask for end users. So not only are we asking users to figure out how to bridge across chains and be okay with the fact that every application that they're using across every different chain maintains a completely different balance state, and it's effectively they have the same address like on EVM, for example, but their balance is different. So this is already a confusing concept. But then on top of this, we expect them to bridge, and then once they have bridged or deposited funds on these other chains in isolation, Now they need to actually manage these balances in their mind. This is a lot to ask from end users, and this is a pretty bad UX. I really don't understand why there's any expectation of like mass adoption or a pretty significant amount of onboarding of kind of mainstream users while this issue is still present, because it means that you can only interact with one application in isolation or a small set of applications on one chain. As soon as you try to interact with a larger Web3, this experience is next to impossible if you aren't technically inclined. So this is really where the issue starts to become very, very obvious, and of course, very impactful to the growth of Web3, because it means that we can't grow as an industry. And there's more components to this problem that I'll get into in a little bit. But actually, account abstraction, which I'm sure plenty of you are familiar with the benefits of. Actually, account abstraction, I'm not going to lie, it makes this whole problem worse. It makes this fragmentation even more complicated, adds an additional layer of complexity to it, because with account abstraction, specifically in the context of ERC 437, what happens all of a sudden is that I have the smart contract wallet, and of course, like still in this framework of having a different balance on chain A, B, C, and D, and a different account, my account state is actually isolated across all these chains. So I deploy the smart account on chain A. Okay, I can use it now. If I want to use it on chain B, C, and D, I have to go and deploy it on all these other chains. And then let's say I want to update my smart account. So I want to change something about the state of my smart account. I want to change the signer of the smart account. I want to add a module, something like this. I do this on chain A, let's say. Now on chain B, C, and D, these are now completely different account states. So my account on chain A, it has a new signer, it has the altered state, it has a module, whatever it may be. But because chains are isolated and there is no kind of shared communication or shared state, especially with smart contract wallets, now the state of chain A and my account on it deviates completely from B, C, and D. So this is a huge problem, because it means that as an end user, using account abstraction, it's incredibly complicated and confusing, because now I have to go and update my account on every chain that I'm using, as well as deploy it. So there's a huge number of problems here, and it's actually only amplified by account abstraction. So this leads into the problem of how do you fix it, right? So how are these problems fixable? And of course, you guys are aware of the solution to this, which is chain abstraction. This is what we're all building towards, and this is of course what the event today is based around. But what is chain abstraction? Like, what actually is this term that everybody uses? Is it kind of a buzzword at the moment? Like, what does it actually refer to in a practical sense? I think there isn't a lot of social consensus around this still. You have a lot of solutions that are building towards chain abstraction, but if you ask 100 people in the space what is chain abstraction, you're going to get a lot of different answers. So you might have some degree of consistency, but generally the way that we defined it, and we actually produced an article that we just published about this yesterday, which is that we basically introduced a formal definition to the term of chain abstraction. And this definition was that chain abstraction is ultimately, first of all, an experience. So you can understand chain abstraction as an experience to which a user, of course, doesn't have to mind the underlying chains that they're using. They can leverage the entire application under like one balance and one account. They can, seamlessly interact without really needing to be aware of the dynamics between chains. And this materializes as one definition, which is a user experience exempt from the manual processes required to interact with multiple chains, which is basically just the same thing that I just mentioned, a user interacting across the ecosystem, across applications without needing to manually interact with multiple chains, because this can be done for them, or there can be things like chain signatures, which aggregates multiple, multi-chain interaction or whatever it may be. There's a lot of different approaches to it at the moment, but ultimately this is how you can kind of understand chain abstraction as a user experience exempt from the manual processes required to interact with multiple chains, removing the multi-chain experience from end users and making Web3 UX feel far more akin to a single chain, taking what I mentioned a moment ago, which is kind of, the good UX of a single application to every application. So this great UX that you can have within one app is now no longer exclusive to that one app. It can be used across the board. So with chain abstraction, now of course you have this like great dynamic where as a user, I can onboard via social login, I can onboard via my wallet, and I can interact with any application, A, B, C, or D. Let's assume that all these applications are on different chains, but I don't know this as a user. I'm just interacting with them. I have my balance, and I'm, leveraging these applications, and that's the end of it. It's the two entities in kind of the process of Web3 is now just the user and the application. There is no notion of what chain is this using, what chain am I using, what chain are my balances on. the user, this is irrelevant information. This is infrastructural information. This should only be left to the end developer, not the user. So to the user, they just simply interact with applications. It doesn't matter what chain that they're on. That's the end of it. They leverage Web3 without paying any mind to where their funds are in terms of the specific chain and where what chain that the applications that they're using are leveraging. For developers, this also presents a really interesting dynamic because it means that as a developer, I basically create an application now which is chain agnostic. So developers are no longer confined to the sort of boundaries of a single ecosystem. Rather, they can now branch out to any chain, even across VMs potentially, and their application can be truly chain agnostic, where they can programmatically interact with 5, 10 different chains, and it's very easy. This is what we call orchestration, which is basically the developer-facing implementation of chain abstraction, allowing them to seamlessly do cross-chain transactions, facilitate cross-chain interaction with end users in a way where it's basically hidden from the user experience. And for these developers, it allows them to create applications that exceed the confines and the boundaries of any specific chain or ecosystem. So this is really important. And of course, I don't really get too much into in this presentation, but maybe one of the other speakers mentioned this. It's just like for developers, there's a lot of cool implications here in terms of the lack of ecosystem specific competition and a much more free market kind of like dynamic in Web3, where now I'm competing with every other protocol across every other ecosystem, not just within my ecosystem. But anyways, the kind of core idea here with developers is that I can now create applications that leverage one balance, one user base, one kind of collective of users. And of course, I can create chain agnostic applications as a result, which changes the entire dynamic of how I accrue value as a developer, how I onboard users as a developer, and ultimately how I interact with the larger ecosystem, which is a big benefit. So now, as I'm going to get into in a moment, we kind of see chain abstraction in layers. So this graphic that we made is actually something that we did with Agoric, if anybody here is familiar with them, where we basically kind of had two kind of flow charts here. One is with the existing fragmented ecosystem, different balances, different accounts across every different chain as an end user, and then applications are deployed on one or a few different chains, which are themselves usually incompatible sometimes. And so, this is like the existing ecosystem, right? Applications are deployed on specific chains or confined to certain chains. Users are confined to their isolated balances on certain chains. This is a problem, right? And then the new kind of ecosystem that we're all building towards is this kind of dynamic where as a user, I have my universal account or my one account across all chains. I have my aggregated balance. So my one balance across all chains. So I don't care about the dynamics between chains at this point. I have my account and that's it. And then applications are deployed across every chain essentially. They are chain agnostic. They are not confined in any specific chain. So this kind of flowchart on the right, this is really the experience that we're going towards. And you can see the just visual change across that versus the existing ecosystem. And it's pretty significant. And of course, this changes everything about how we build applications and how we onboard users. So now to maybe something that you guys haven't heard a million times today, which is the way that we kind of categorize chain abstraction and understand chain abstraction is through a layered approach. Now, what I really want to kind of hammer in here that we've been pushing really hard for at Particle is that chain abstraction is ultimately a stack of solutions. There is no one solution that's going to one day give us chain abstraction. We don't claim to be that. Nobody else should claim to be that. Chain abstraction is rather a very simply a collective or a stack, a layer, multiple layers of solutions that then together enable this experience of chain abstraction that I defined a moment ago. So to understand this is really that chain abstraction is collaborative and not competitive. There is no monopoly around the technology of chain abstraction because chain abstraction is no single technology. It's a collective. This is why chain abstraction is very much a collaborative vertical because it requires a number of solutions at different layers in the stack to, ultimately allow for this kind of seamless multi-chain experience, which embodies this kind of philosophy of modularism, not maximalism, which I personally like a lot. So how do you actually look at the stack and the layers of chain abstraction? This can ultimately kind of be understood as, for example, the most popular framework for this is the Cake framework from Frontier Research, which kind of separates a more granular collection of technologies into the application layer, the permission layer, the solver layer, and the settlement layer. This is a really interesting way to look at the kind of chain abstraction landscape. I would recommend, if you guys haven't yet, read the Cake framework from Frontier Research. You can Google it. It's a fantastic paper made by them. This is really, I think, one of the best categorizations of the more specific technologies that compose chain abstraction today. So they're doing a wonderful job, and we're a big fan of this framework. Now, when you're looking at chain abstraction solutions within the ecosystem, so when you kind of take a step above like specific technologies and more so look at like, projects that are specifically trying to solve for chain abstraction, we actually built this framework called the layered approach with Agoric. So this is by us, Particle, and as well as the team at Agoric, where we basically look at all the solutions that are in the space, Socket, Agoric, ourselves, even like, Avail is building really some cool kind of blockchain level chain abstraction stuff, near all these other guys, and basically kind of categorized the collective and the stack of technologies, which are composed by these different technologies. But, the chain abstraction specific technologies can be understood as blockchain level, account level, and application level. Blockchain level referring to kind of unification and standardization across blockchains, account level bringing chain abstraction to user accounts, kind of unifying balances and addresses, and application level allowing developers to orchestrate seamless cross-chain transactions and kind of create a chain agnostic application. So this is kind of like how you can understand the layers of chain abstraction in terms of projects that are specifically building towards it. So with all that said, now that you guys kind of understand, why is chain abstraction important, which you guys, like I said, I'm sure I've heard plenty of today. And then like how you can understand chain abstraction, what is chain abstraction defined as specifically, and what are the layers that compose it. Now I want to introduce our solution at the account level. So like I mentioned, at Particle Network, we are building specifically towards account level chain abstraction. So chain abstraction that targets user accounts. This fits very well within the stack of application level chain abstraction and blockchain level chain abstraction. We actually had I was in Austin, Texas for a consensus. I guess it was just last week or so, or a week or two ago. And we did a live stream with, it was myself, Agoric, and Avail, where we talked about kind of like the dynamic between solutions and like using account level chain abstraction as well as Avail Nexus, and then Agoric orchestration API. A lot of really cool stuff around that. But at Particle, we have a very kind of targeted and granular approach here to account level chain abstraction through a technology that we call universal accounts, which can very simply be understood as having one address and one balance that spans across every chain. So before universal accounts, I want to go back to this graphic that I showed a little while ago, which is the issues of account abstraction in a chain abstracted landscape. Like I said, account abstraction actually makes the issue of chain abstraction harder because now I have isolated account states across chains and I have to deploy across chains. So like smart accounts and account abstraction within like the chain abstraction landscape is actually quite difficult, and it makes it quite isolating and difficult for end users and developers. Now, universal accounts are kind of an evolution of this. It's an evolution of smart accounts and account abstraction into a more chain abstracted kind of native way, where now instead of this kind of like mess of balances in every different chain, deploy and update my account state across every different chain, we have this experience. This is what universal accounts bring to the ecosystem, which is having one kind of deployment of your accounts. You don't need to manage deployments across chains. You don't need to manage your state across chains. It's unified. So you've solved the problem of fragmented account state through the means of account abstraction. And of course, universal accounts, most importantly, give you access to one balance that spans every chain. So I have my USDT on Arbitrum. I have my USDT on Base. I have my USDT on Ethereum. I have my ETH on Ethereum. I have my ETH on Arbitrum, whatever. But as a user, I don't know that this is on different chains. I have my one balance that's represented to me. I use this anywhere that I want. It doesn't matter where my balances are. I can just leverage my collective, funds on this universal account. And it feels like I'm on one chain. This is the experience of a single chain UX. I can bring this to any application across the ecosystem, leverage my single balance. And of course, this can be fragmented across multiple chains. It doesn't matter. It's presented to the user as one balance that is collected across every chain that they're using. So this is what we're building with universal accounts. Huge contrast to the issues that are presented with smart accounts into this kind of new era of deploy it once, you have your balance, it spans every single chain, and this is the account that you use. You have one address, one balance for every chain. This is ultimately how you can understand universal accounts. Now, at Particle Network, we're building a lot of different kind of components of this. Universal accounts, and I won't get too into the granular details today. There's a lot of research that we've done around this, but to achieve having one balance across all chains, it's a lot more complicated than you might think, because you basically need to coordinate very atomic, efficient, low cost cross-chain transactions for every transaction that a user does to automatically move their balances across chains, and create this perception of one balance across every chain. So, I mean, this is of course the essence of abstraction, but the underlying infrastructure here that we're building is very complicated. There's a lot of moving parts. Specifically, universal accounts are composed by what we call universal liquidity. Universal liquidity is the property of having one balance across all chains. So this means that we automatically bridge funds across chains every time that you need it. So I have 100 USDT on Arbitrum. I want to use this on Base. As a user, all I know is I have 100 USDT, and I leverage this on Base because we automatically bridge that from Arbitrum over to Base with the transaction that I'm using the USDT for. So this is like universal liquidity. It's basically giving the user the ability to leverage their funds across any chain. And this is just done by per transaction automatic bridging. You have universal gas, which allows users to pay for gas fees with any token. So I can pay, let's say I'm doing a transaction again on Base. I'm using my funds from Arbitrum and I'm paying for gas in something on, I don't know, Ethereum or whatever. Like it allows you to basically use any token regardless of the chain for gas fees. And then finally, at Particle Network, specifically, we're building a Cosmos chain, which backs universal accounts. So universal accounts are deployed across every EVM chain to start. And then, of course, it'll be accessible across even non-EVM chains. But this is actually coordinated and verified by our own Cosmos chain, which is basically responsible for the computation, the execution, and the verification of these cross-chain transactions. So you can think of it as sort of like a large decentralized sovereign, blockchain that exists exclusively on the back end to coordinate cross-chain transactions and basically enable this sort of flow where I have one account state, one balance. That's all coordinated and kind of tracked and balance sheets are kept by the Cosmos chain itself that we're deploying. So universal accounts as the front end for users. This is what users leverage within the entire ecosystem. One balance, one address. Universal liquidity to move these balances across chains automatically. Universal gas to allow users to pay for gas within any token, and our Cosmos chain, which exists in the background, to coordinate this all and verify it all. So for developers, given this is kind of like slightly more builder focused, using this is very simple. So if I want to implement universal accounts within my application and allow a user to leverage a universal account, which of course gives them access to leveraging their balance from any chain, it's super simple, right? So as a developer, typically the way that this goes is I have a user that connects via some sort of connection mechanism, Rainbow Kit, Web3 modal, whatever you want to use. They then connect their wallet and, through EIP 1193, I have my signer, I plug this into Ethers, Web3.js, or VM or something, then I execute transactions through Ethers or any other library. So it's really simple. It's like, this is the general flow that you see within most applications. Universal accounts, all it simply introduces is that you kind of connect your signer, your initial wallet connection through Rainbow Kit, Web3 modal, whatever, to a universal account. We have an SDK for this. So you just directly plug your signer into that account, and then you use the resulting signer for Ethers or Web3.js or anything. So it's actually like 20 lines of code as a developer. You just add in this quick module to your application, plugs into your signer, goes into Ethers or Web3.js, and all of a sudden your user is now leveraging a universal account and enabling them to seamlessly transact across the entire ecosystem without really knowing it. So removing the whole chain experience from their kind of account is done by basically 20 lines of code in this case. So that's about it. I kind of went through a lot there. There was a lot of different kind of components of that. Went through what is chain abstraction, like what's the actual definition of chain abstraction, how is it composed, what are we building a particle network, which is universal accounts. So hopefully kind of didn't lose you guys too much there. If you want to learn a little bit more about particle network and what we're building, then I have some QR codes up on the screen. You can follow us on Twitter at particlenTWRK. I also, of course, have my Twitter at Tabasco Web3, and you can find our website, particle.network. So guys, thanks again for having me. Looks like a great event. I wish I was there in person, and looking forward to the other speakers here.
Thank you so much, Ethan. We'll just go around the venues to see if you have any questions.
Sure. Hey, Ethan, great talk. I had a question about something I read in the docs. It said that particle network allows dual staking via Babylon. I didn't quite understand it, so I thought I'd ask you that.
Could you say that one more time? I'm having some issue with the audio. I think.
Particle network allows dual staking via Babylon through Bitcoin. I didn't quite understand that, so I thought I'd ask you that.
Yeah, definitely. If I'm correct, you asked about dual staking by Babylon, right? Gotcha. Yeah, so kind of, I think it's a great question. And we covered this a little bit. We haven't had a lot of announcements around it. I think we just posted our first tweet about our usage of Babylon this week. But it's pretty interesting because basically we have this Cosmos chain, which acts as a kind of central coordinator and point of verification for all transactions initiated by universal accounts. And this chain, this Cosmos chain, acting as kind of like this backend coordinator, has a lot of responsibility. So this chain is responsible for ultimately verifying all these cross-chain transactions and being the central source of decentralized coordination for universal accounts. So this chain is really important to have a high degree of resilience. So because of this, we thought about just having the chain be a very simple like DPoS, have our own validator set secured by our own token, which we're going to release quite soon. And that's possible. But the issue is that whenever you have a brand new chain with a brand new token, with a validator set that's only secured by your token, there's a huge risk here with volatility and the reduction of security. Because as my token is volatile, my validators are backed by the economic security of my token, which if it's brand new and volatile is pretty weak. So this means that there really isn't a lot of economic security backing the verification of transactions with universal accounts, which means that it's actually not a very secure or kind of like resilient solution. This is a pretty big problem. So like we kind of went back to the drawing board. We're like, okay, well, how do we like coordinate this with the Cosmos chain with a validator set that isn't kind of at the behest of the lacking economic security of our token to start? And this is where Babylon comes in. So the Babylon actually allows us to leverage BTC, so Bitcoin, as economic security backing the entire chain that coordinates universal accounts. This is really important because this means that through a dual staking model, which essentially allows us to have kind of like two sets of validators, half are kind of verified and are not verified, but like backed by our native token. The other half are backed by BTC through the means of Babylon, and they both collectively need to agree on validity to actually have something be considered valid, which allows us to therefore leverage the economic security of BTC to kind of secure the network and make sure that we verify things in a way that's honest and trustworthy. Because without it, we kind of suffer from a lot of issues around volatility. So Babylon was really important for us to basically enable this dual staking model, allowing for the shared economic security of BTC, which basically allows us to bootstrap this Cosmos chain without any risk of like volatility induced reduction of economic security, because BTC is the most, at least in our opinion, like the most economically secure, like largest asset in the ecosystem. So because of this, it was really important that we use Babylon, and it's one of the core parts of what makes our chain what we would at least consider to be very like resilient and reliable in verifying these transactions. So it's a pretty important core part of our architecture, allowing us to leverage validators through our native token, validators through Babylon to secure kind of a dual staking model, and both contribute to consensus and validity.
Thank you, Ethan. I think that's all the questions. Thank you for your time.
So thanks, guys.
Thank you so much, Ethan. I will text you on Telegram. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Appreciate it, man.
Great.
Bye.
Next up, we have